I'm Indy Neidell.
I'm Spartacus Olsson.
And I'm Anna Deinhard.
And this is a live out of the Foxholes. And so instead of, preparing answers and things and filming it behind the desk, Anna's just going to ask us some questions from some of you guys, and we're going to answer them.
As best we can.
As best we can. And and we can. Because, here's the funny thing. We've done this for a long time. We know a lot about this war.
So, Darius West wants to know, why are the Allies so unready for war with Japan in 1942? Why does Japan in 1942 have so much edge against the Allies? Multiple raid and successful campaigns and long-range seaborne invasions should have met more resistance. Why did the Japanese have such an early advantage? Why were the Allies apparently quite so incompetent?
Can I take this one?
Please do.
I think you can take it if you want.
I don't want to.
Okay, I think you could. When you're talking about let's look at some of the Western allies that have a lot of colonies in Southeast Asia, the ones that Japan attacked. The French, the Dutch, the British. France had been overrun and occupied. The Netherlands had been overrun and occupied. Britain was under bombardment and was fighting the Battle of Britain, and also had to deal with things in North Africa that were at least closer to home. It wasn't incompetence that prevented them from fighting the Japanese. Who were they going to fight them with? What were the Dutch going to use? All there was that the Dutch had to fight back was in Indonesia, was what was in Indonesia, which was a colonial outpost, a colonial army that was never intended to fight the might of Japan, or the might of India, or China, or the might of any larger power there. Same with France, same with Britain.
And how were the Americans going to get there in 1942? Well, it's just impossible.
Now, you have to get into the reasons for Japan's attacks on all of these people in December, January and February, December 1941, January, February, March 1942. But what became a hard embargo initiated by the Americans on long story and too long for out of the Foxholes. But why would the Americans be ready for a war with Japan? Japan was worried that America would go to war with them if they attacked British Malaya and Dutch, Indonesia and French Indochina. They wanted to preempt that war by attacking the Americans at Pearl Harbor and the Philippines, the Far East Air Force stuff. But if America did not go to war with Germany for invading the Netherlands, why would they go to war with Germany for invading the Dutch East Indies? No, America was not expecting a war with Japan. No. And the British, French, and Dutch were occupied. Physically occupied. They couldn't send anybody. Incompetence. Where do you get incompetence? How were the Dutch supposed to send people from the Netherlands to fight for the Dutch East Indies? Should they say, excuse me, Mr. Hitler, we need to send 100,000 troops in all these boats over to the East Indies? That's not how it worked.
And I think a salient point you made there was the Americans were not expecting to go to war with Japan. They were preparing for a war in Europe at this point. And everything they had done was geared towards, we're going to send men over to Europe. And now suddenly switching around and then going to Japan. Well, that's not something you do in a matter of days or weeks. That takes months and months.
And the Americans had no fast oilers. They couldn't send ships quickly to fight a war. What we had was the Far East Air Force in the Philippines. That was the deterrent. That was George Marshall's deterrent, was all those B-17s that could fly over anybody sailing across the South China Sea, the Sea of Japan, and bomb them because he loved them. And it turned out they had problems, but that was the deterrent. And Japan, people forget, sure, they hit Pearl Harbor because that was the Navy, but they also hit the same day, destroyed the Far East Air Force. If they only destroy one, you have to destroy both of them. Otherwise, this was the real American deterrent. The Pearl Harbor fleet was a showpiece. It was older ships, but this was the modern American planes. This was our deterrent against Japan. I'm babbling. I could babble about this for hours, actually. 5 hours specifically, minute by minute.
You could. Yeah.
I could.
Yeah, you could.
So.
Evan Crum. What was the survival rate for B-17 crews over Europe? My grandfather flew a B-17 in late 44 and 45 through 30 missions, and after doing research on him and his flight paths, I found this quote. you had a better chance of surviving as an island-hopping Marine fighting the Japanese in the Pacific than as a member of a B-17 crew over Europe. Is this true for the crews early in the war before the P-47 and P-41 escorts?
Oh boy. Okay. Well, first of all, great respect for your grandfather and for what he went through during the war. That was probably one of the worst places you can end up in. Across all theaters of war, across all armies, flying a B-17 over Europe was an absolute nightmare. The premise of your question is absolutely correct. The survival rate of a B-17 crew member for each mission was about 50-50 for most of 1944, and it grew to about 85% per sortie, which is better, but that was only in the last months of the war. In the beginning, they were losing, they had a 50-50 chance of dying, or risk of dying. Making it through the 25 missions they had to fly in one tour, they had a chance of survival of about 25%. And you can see this also in the losses of the plane. I think you'll know this. How many they produced? Some 10 or
well, okay.
B-17s?
No, 12,731 planes of them were produced.
And
And 4,735 were lost, which is 37%. And it's interesting that you mentioned the missions and stuff, because Catch-22 is one of my favorite books.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about the missions, because, the only way you can get out of doing the extra missions, the 50, 60, 70 missions that they keep getting out, only if you have mental issues can you get out. But if you want to get out, then you're sane, so you have to do it. That's Catch-22.
Because no sane person would ever
submit to do that stuff.
So
You reminded me of that. But those are the numbers. Yeah, 12,731 and 4,735.
Yeah, Indy has an amazing memory for numbers.
I'm good at numbers.
I rely on him for this thing.
Ask me about baseball numbers. I'm crazy good at numbers.
He can tell you anything about baseball numbers for 100 years backwards and more.
150.
Yeah, there you go. See, even that number escapes me. But there you go. You have it. So, and you think, okay, so 37% of all planes were lost. Not all of those flew over Europe, but in Europe, numbers were about that. The thing is, though, that you didn't only face the risk of dying because your plane went down. You could die inside of the plane from fighter fire, from flak going, exploding and going in through the body of the plane, hypoxia, hypothermia. There were so many ways you could die as an airman on a B-17, and people did. So they had a very, very low average age.
Flying coffins.
Yeah, average age was below 25, so it was gruesome. And as I've talked about in many other places, their service was heroic, and many of them didn't have a choice. Some of them volunteered. The sad bit is that on the ground, a lot of people died as well from what they were doing, and there was this dual tragedy of a strategy that ended up not being very useful for the war itself, but killed both the poor guys who had to carry it out and the poor people who were at the receiving end of it. So it's a lose-lose situation that they were facing. But respect your grandfather for making it through 30 missions. That's a real feat.
Joey Talley. I've noticed you touched on prominent anti-Nazi officers in the upper echelons of leadership in their public and private criticism of Hitler and the Nazis. I was doing some reading, though, and I read about anecdotes of soldiers on the Eastern Front having whole scrapbooks filled with photographs of the crimes of war, sometimes even sending them back to their families. I'll try and find a source of this if I'm able, but I'm just wondering if Nazi ideology was more prominent amongst the rank and file, and the officer corps' dissatisfaction with the Nazis was due to the austere, conservative, noble tradition of the Prussian officer corps, which often saw itself as above politics, rather than any broad anti-fascist stance. As always, thanks for making this content in such a conscientious and respectful manner.
Okay, I think I'll answer that, India. It's
you can see I'm like holding my hand.
It's in my wheelhouse. Okay, let's unpack that. I'll try to make this brief because it's not that complicated. First of all, Nazi support was pretty much equal throughout the German population, regardless of class, society and whatnot. We don't know the exact number because we don't have polling numbers, but about 60 to 80% of the German population supported the Nazis. And we know that from, first of all, the SS situation reports, the Meldungen aus dem Reich, which actually are upstairs there in the library, the complete volumes, all 17 volumes of it, where they detail the opinion of the German people from 1933 to 1945, so we know what's going on. And by the end of the war, there was still massive support for the Nazi regime in Germany. So that there was no difference if it was higher officers or lower officers. You touch upon something, though, that I've covered a lot in War Against Humanity, and that is the actual documentation of war crimes by the perpetrators themselves or by people witnessing it that they were reporting back to people back in Germany. And this is the smoking gun that disproves the idea that Germany and Germans did not know what was going on in the East, what atrocities were being committed. They knew very well. And one of the reasons they knew that was that you are absolutely correct. They sent pictures, they sent letters. I've quoted a lot of them in War Against Humanity, these actual letters. We have them still. And we know from resistance groups like the White Rose, who actually reported on these in their flyers, which is one of the reasons they were executed. So there's no doubt that what you have seen is correct. There are ample evidence and many sources that show it. The other side of your question is the idea that Prussian tradition would put officers above politics. We've debunked this a lot, both Indy and I. That's the whole clean Wehrmacht myth that arose after the war.
Myth is the important word there.
Yes. Yeah. And this actually came about largely because Franz Halder, previous chief of staff, was given a job with the U.S. Army Historian's Office and was allowed to recruit all of his cronies and write the history of the Wehrmacht for the U.S. Army, where they basically just rewrote history. Manstein was part of it as well, where we catch them out with lies in every corner. And of course, their argument was that they were Prussian officers who were above politics, but it was absolutely not true. They were very, very much involved in the politics of the Nazi regime, and they were big supporters of it. So no, there was not a greater support among the rank and file, but there was great support among the rank and file, and there was great support among the officers. So that's the simple question. Answer to the question.
All right, there you go. Anna, thank you very much for today. Those are fantastic questions. And Sparty, thank you for today. Those were answers. And this was a really good time. And maybe we'll see you soon again on another live out of the Foxholes. And to get us there, obviously, you should join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And if you join at what level is it?
It's officer level.
Officer level, then we absolutely will answer your question. Even if it's something personal about me or Anna or Sparty or Clara. Clara, they get to ask if it's about you, then it's...
I'm an open book.
Clara's an open book.
She likes fielding questions about SD cards.
Yeah, ask her about that. Well, anyhow, we will see you next time. So from all of us to all of you, Excelsior!